So now it is now my pleasure to finally introduce today's speaker. We are joined by Jamison Chase Banks, who is a multidisciplinary artist who creates films, paintings, performances, and installations. He's a dual citizen of the Seneca Cayuga tribe and the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. His work often explores the history of war and territorial expansion, both literal and psychological. Banks often reimagine symbols or characters of popular culture in contexts that challenge their original meanings. Banks has been exhibiting work for more than a decade and holds an AFA and BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts, where he also taught for 12 years. And in addition to all of those things, Jamison is also the second ever mobile artist in residence here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. And for those of you who don't know what the Mobile Artist in Residence program is, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum has a beautiful art to go truck. Here is a rendition of the truck, but you may have seen it driving around Santa Fe or northern New Mexico, bringing programs, art making programs throughout the community. But in addition to that, we also get to work with incredible artists who use the truck as a mobile toolkit for expanding their art practice. And so Jamison is the second ever mobile artist in residence, and he is going to share what he's been working on as a part of this program, which is so exciting. And I've learned so much already, but I'm really looking forward to learning even more about what you've been up to for the past several months. So Jamison, without any further delay, thank you so much for being here and looking forward to learning about what you've been up to.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. That again, I'm Jamison Chase Banks. I'm a Seneca Cayuga and a Cherokee. I also have Iowa descendancy. I taught at the Institute of American Indian Arts, like Molly mentioned, for the last 12 years. And so that really kind of set the tone for a lot of the type of work that I do. It's certainly indigenous based, but it also kind of feathers in a lot of other kind of components like history, family, and then also honoring certain places wherever I kind of work. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see what I'm up to. Everybody see that good?
Looks great.
Just give me a second. All right. Okay, so I'm starting off with this slide just because last summer I did a little workshop here in the studio that I'm sitting in right now with some students, age group. I think they were like anywhere from 10 to 15. And so that was kind of a jump off point for this idea, being able to share some of the topics that I'm going to share with you today. So they kind of revolve around dinosaurs, history, around place, Ghost Ranch, the history of Georgia O'Keeffe and how she kind of feathers into this story as well. So this is just a little kind of playful image on that. This next image is an image of me when I was 10 years old. I grew up in Kansas on the Kansas-Oklahoma border. And so some summers I would go and visit my grandfather in Texas. So this was one of those summers. So this is myself sitting next to my maternal grandfather. We had just gone to an exhibition of called Dinosaurs Take Over Dallas. And in this exhibition, they had a lot of animatronic dinosaurs. So this really just blew my mind. And at the time, you know, it was about 1987, 1988, and things were really kind of picking up for some reason with dinosaurs. And I also had somebody come into my classroom and kind of show us a diorama, and I'll get a little bit more into that, but that was kind of the jump off point for this whole experience, was thinking about this experience with my grandfather, seeing these dinosaurs that were moving, and then also having this experience where somebody came into my classroom and shared an opportunity to make a diorama. I'm sharing this image because I'm also a father. And interestingly enough, in this project, I've been able to bring my son into it. So he's become a participant in this work as well. Now, I show this also because, as I mentioned, I taught at IAI for a number of years. And so mentorship is a major kind of component in my work as well. oftentimes I will bring in a lot of other people and, share in the experience, but also learn from other people and then in kind be learned from. So that being said, this image here is an image of one of my former students named Animkiwa White Eagle. Now, Animkiwa was really an exceptional student. And throughout this process, I guess I should backtrack and talk a little bit about this artist in residence program. When I first got on, a friend of mine, Bess Murphy, who began or helped create this program, talked to me a little bit about it and, kind of like feeling it out if I would be interested in it. And it started my creative juices going because I had started thinking about this idea for dinosaurs and, I just really felt like there was a lot of meat on the bone. That's something that could really be chewed on for a while. So, after a while of thinking about the artist in residence, I started to develop some ideas, and then I brought them forward. And the ideas that came to be the most powerful, well, of course, the one that I worked on now with the dinosaurs. So I was also given this opportunity to give an artist in residence to a mentoree of my choosing. And so Animkiwa just kind of came to mind because of his tenacity in class and his ability to just keep working until he was satisfied. So that really kind of stuck with me. And I thought about the different things that Animkiwa brought to the table. And I thought that he could really fit into this project really well. So you'll actually get to see a lot of what he got to do in this presentation. So again, my first jump off point was that experience with my grandfather, but then that secondary kind of experience of the diorama was really kind of central. And so I thought, well, that would be a really cool element to bring into, classrooms or different community spaces where people could, in a sense, enjoy that same experience that I did. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of just a rough rendition of what I was thinking about, so that when it came time to share these ideas, it was pretty clear what I wanted to do. So this is idea number one. This image that I'm sharing here is a plethora of the different types of animals that existed in New Mexico, or at least northern New Mexico, during the Triassic era. Now, I'm going to throw around some of these kind of eras, and I'm sure that a lot of you maybe not have a really good idea of where these eras exist in time. And they're really kind of hard to wrap your head around. But the Triassic is the time before the big dinosaurs in the Jurassic or the Cretaceous. So the Jurassic is kind of the precursor to all those bigger dinosaurs. We're starting to have some big dinosaurs, but the majority of them are somewhat small, alligator size or even smaller. Now, there's also some small mammals that existed too at this time, but they were relatively low in their populations. So from that kind of like image, this gives you an idea of these renditions that I did. These are going to be the renditions that people will be able to utilize if they want when we go into those spaces to make dioramas. So you'll see the kind of more fleshed out versions of these on down the road in the presentation. So the second idea I had was that I wanted to utilize a space that was captivating, but also would stand in for where these, these characters that I'm creating that are kind of hinging on being paleontologists from a long time ago. I wanted them to have some kind of a stage. So this was what I envisioned roughly for kind of a landscape portrait, if you will. This gives you an idea of what I was kind of looking for, the type of like feeling or the mood that I was trying to convey. And this is, of course, an antiquated image of people, maybe professional or amateur paleontologists working in the field. So then this is the third idea that I had. So the third idea hinged on me developing a model that was based on one of these Triassic pre-dinosaurs or proto-dinosaurs. Through my research, I came to find out that there was a dinosaur named after Georgia O'Keeffe, coincidentally. So I was like, wow, this is like all these things are kind of lining up for me. So I dove right into the research and found that this animal, which is called Ephegia, which is Latin for ghost, and O'Keeffeia is the last part of the name, was found rather recently. So I think only about in 2006, a gentleman by the name of Sterling Nesbitt discovered this in a block that had been taken out of Ghost Ranch in the 40s. So a lot of these types of animals were taken away and sent to, prestigious schools where throughout the decades, people continued to work on them. And so this was one of those blocks. But interestingly enough, most of these blocks are chocked full of an animal that's not Ephegia, but an animal that's called Coelophysis. And that animal is the state fossil of New Mexico. So, we find those in profusion at Ghost Ranch. And so naturally that became kind of the go-to fossil for New Mexico. But like I said, inside one of these blocks is what they found Ephegia. Now, Ephegia was a vegetarian and Coelophysis was a carnivore. So they probably, competed against each other. But you'll see throughout some of these slides that Ephegia was more kind of like akin to a Komodo dragon. If you mixed like a Komodo dragon, an alligator, and a roadrunner all together, maybe an ostrich. So if you can imagine the kind of power that an ostrich can, the forces that it can exert, by like defending itself from lions and stuff like that, I imagine Ephegia had that same kind of capability. So it could, probably inflict some pretty good damage with the weapons that it had. This picture is a picture that I wanted to kind of emulate with that last idea, the third idea. So you can see the guy's all, intently looking at his work, and it appears that he's really working, but it's probably staged. He's pretty clean. He's got his nice cardigan and tie on. This was kind of what I was shooting for as well. So this was the third idea. Now, the fourth idea was an idea for the installation itself. We'd been throwing around different ideas of where the installation could potentially be. And then, we always had the idea that Axel was going to be the one that we landed on. And now for those of you who are not familiar with Axel is a big van that moves around, and it's fitted out with sheetrock and windows on the inside. So it's like a moving gallery. Well, it is a moving gallery. So this was my idea to put in the back of the truck. My idea kind of centered around the commodification of these dinosaurs and their parts, their remains, and that, people may sometimes forget that it takes a lot of work to get the dinosaurs prepared so that when you go into a museum, you can learn about them. So this was kind of my idea, was that, it takes a lot of labor to get these things out of the ground. So then moving forward with my research, once I had those ideas down pretty good, the research began at the digital archives of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. Now, within the archive, there are heaps of different things that she collected throughout her life, and they're all cataloged by the people here at the museum. Some of the things that are cataloged are actual animal remains as well. And so this kind of image of this eagle really kind of spoke to me, because on some level, like I just, mentioned before, birds are a direct descendant of these animals. So, it almost seemed emblematic that I would be, looking at this image. But for some reason, this image just really spoke to me. And within it, you can see that species pending is something that they don't quite know, but it really was a coining term that really had a lot of poignancy to me, and it just stuck. Another thing that was really speaking to me, and I take kind of like a lot of subconscious information, so I don't like just turn off things that are, maybe being said subconsciously. But one thing that was kind of coming to the surface was the 1956 film Giant. This was James Dean's last film, and it's filled with a lot of kind of racist overtones, and but it won a lot of Academy Awards, so it was like a sign of the times. But I guess what I'm getting at is I'm not trying to recreate Giant, but I come from the Midwest. Giant is about the Midwest. It's about extraction. That's what we're doing here. So there's a lot of similarities, and I guess some of the mood that I'm trying to create with this is built into it. So it's not really overt, but it's there. And I found out later that there was a connection between this film and the beginnings of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, coincidentally enough. Now, if you remember in this last slide, the giant opening scene at the bottom there, that really spoke to me, just the way that looked. Maybe it's the complementary colors, but it really spoke to me, and I wanted to kind of use that on some level. So when Nimkiwa came onto this project, he's really good at digital media formatting. So I thought to myself, this would be a perfect match for a Nimkiwa. And so I mentioned this idea that I would like to have our title be in that kind of marquee format that Giant had. So this was the very first rendition of what he came up with, and it was a lot of painstaking work that he did. I'll just say that throughout this whole project, this has been a lot of painstaking work, and we've really, the Georgia O'Keeffe has been able to give us the time and the allowance to really sink our teeth into all these different meandering journeys that we've taken. So this is another rendition that Nimkiwa came up with. We had been throwing around the idea that this should be somewhat appealing to the younger audience. And so this is what Nimkiwa came up with based on some preliminary research on what Aphigia looked like. And they're really just spectacular. This is what an MQ ultimately came up with, and it's one could even say it's even maybe better than the original Giant. It's just really elegant. It's just beautiful. I'm just amazed with this production. So throughout this experience, we also were, a great opportunity to be able to go and visit other places. So we started out with going and seeing the Georgia O'Keeffe homes, the two different homes in Abiquiu and at Ghost Ranch. And we did it during the same day. So I can't remember. I think this might be Abiquiu with the black door. So this was the Abiquiu house. And I joke that this looks like our band picture. We also had the opportunity to go down to the New Mexico State Museum of Natural History and Science, and we got to go behind the scenes to check out some of the things that you don't normally get to see. And there were thousands upon thousands of specimens, and they all come from New Mexico. So it's a really rich environment to go visit if you've not. And they have a new exhibit, I think, on Permian or Triassic animals right now. The next trip we took was to go up to Ghost Ranch itself just to visit. Now I have a friend, Joanne Lafrac, who I had lunch with in before we had gone up to Ghost Ranch, and kind of shared this idea. And she mentioned and shared with me about all the richness of dinosaurs at Ghost Ranch. And I didn't quite, I guess, understand that it was going to be so loaded. So Ghost Ranch has its own little museum, and I think it's called the Ruth Hall Paleontology Museum. So inside that, you will see little, presentations, little dioramas that are akin to something like this. So this diorama in particular is the one of Coelophysis, and you can see that name down at the bottom, and it was collected in 47. A lot of these are kind of like when you find them, they're disarticulated. So this is a rather rare example when you can find one that's somewhat fully intact. Now I have this area in the middle of this dinosaur kind of highlighted because I'm going to show you another image that of that part on down the road. So keep that in mind. At the Ruth Hall Museum, you'll also see dioramas like this, much bigger. And this one, I suppose, was made by Margaret Colbert, who was the wife of a really well-known paleontologist at the time. They both lived at Ghost Ranch for a number of years doing work, and this is one of the things that Margaret did while she was there. It's really spectacular, you know, even though that it's about 70 years old, maybe 60, 70 years old. You can see on the far left, that is a life-size rendition of Coelophysis. So you can see kind of like what it would look like in life. And then in the middle, in the foreground here is a fossil of a phytosaur. So these were really kind of the most ferocious water dwelling predators of that time. And you can see in the painting in the background, there's some swimming around. Now, since then, they've kind of theorized that maybe northern New Mexico wasn't as swampy as they initially thought it was. And I'll show you an image here in the presentation on down the line that shows a little bit more of what they actually thought it looked like. Now, this image here is an image of Ephegia. This is a life-size rendition. I don't know exactly who made it. I tried to find the information on it. It's an older specimen as well, but it can't be too old because Ephegia wasn't found that long ago. But I come to find out that this rendition wasn't fully accurate. That's not to say that it's still not a beautiful piece of work, but they've just come to find out in the last few years, maybe new findings that some of the proportions are inaccurate. But at the time, I didn't know that, right? So I went into Ghost Ranch and I saw the model and I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. That's what I got to start studying. So I went in earnest to, you know, start making sketches of this to try to make a model that would be kind of indicative of my own style. So I even started to source cedar. That's what I had chose to work with because when I was a young man and first came out to New Mexico when I was 18, I used to carve a lot in cedar and I used to sell sculptures. And since then I had stopped doing it. It's an arduous process. It's messy, but it really smells fantastic. So I'd never really kind of lost track of that experience. And even though I hadn't done it for 3 decades, I really wanted to create a challenge for myself. And so I said, I'm going to carve or try to carve a more accurate model of Ephegia based on some findings of my own, and then an experience that we have coming up here really soon in this presentation. And I'll show you really enhanced my understanding of these proportions and the animal in general. Now, I also wanted to kind of, you know, bounce around. So while I'm carving, we're also, you know, Enumclaw is making digital renditions, but we're also working together on this landscape portrait. So I asked Joanne if we could come up to Ghost Ranch and use a space that would be indicative or you know, interesting for this landscape portrait. And she mentioned to me, she was like, well, come on out and I'll show you where the quarry actually is. So I was kind of dumbfounded and didn't quite make sense actually what she was saying. Because I figured, you know, a quarry is something that's got to be, you know, really regulated. And that's not to say that this isn't protected, but we were able to just walk out there and see where this kind of operation happens. Now, at the time, we didn't know what the operation was, but we knew that this is the place it happens. So, you know, we kind of took, we took, you know, different processes and thought about where are we going to make this thing work? And so we took a couple of places and figured out where we wanted to go, and we did a rehearsal run. So this is one of the rehearsal runs where Enumclaw stood in, and then my son Kai is up above him at the top. And then afterward, Enumclaw added in the Model T and the shovel and the kind of like the dated stuff on the sides of the photographs. This is the one we kind of eventually landed on because it was just so captivating. The openness of the landscape and the ability to kind of have your eye move through the composition. It was a really very interesting format. So, there are certainly things wrong with it, but we didn't have everything we needed at the time for an accurate. So again, this is just the rehearsal. So my son and I are wearing t-shirts. They didn't have t-shirts. We're trying to shoot for a time around the turn of the last century. So around when Model Ts were around. We're trying to kind of pay homage to O'Keeffe with the Model T in that she used to have a Model A and drive it around. And so, there's little kind of bits and pieces where we're not trying to hit you over the head with anything. It's more of not so much of a puzzle, but it's a code. There's code in all this. And I think good art has code in there to make you kind of attempt to decode some of this stuff. So I also was given an opportunity to not only just be the artist in residence at the O'Keeffe, but I was also given the opportunity to be the artist in residence at the Ghost Ranch as well. So it was almost like a artist in residence within an artist in residence. We were able to get scholarship, and Enumclaw was able to come out and be a part of this artist in residence as well. Now, this artist in residence entailed not just being an artist in residence, it entailed being up there during Paleo Week. And Paleo Week is something that Ghost Ranch has done in the past, but has recently started up again after COVID. I think we were the first one after COVID to start up again. Now, Paleo Week is where you stay at Ghost Ranch, whether you're camping or you're in the casitas like we were, or you are in some of the other lodging at Ghost Ranch. But from Monday through Friday, from sun up until about 5 p.m. or even later some days, we would be out at the quarries digging, learning from doctorate level instruction from Utah, I think Utah State or Utah University. I'm sorry about that. Dr. Randy Ermis and Dr. Zach Morris from Los Angeles County La Brea Museums. They came and gave us full attention. We were just totally immersed, and you'll see some of these images coming up. But this image off to the right is what I would wake up to walking out my front door. So this is just a profound, phenomenal place to be kind of, as your environment. This next image is an image of Hayden 4. Now, a gentleman named Hayden found this spot, and so it grew into these larger quarries. But this is Hayden 4. I think there's Hayden 3 and Hayden 2, and I have an image that kind of correlates where those are at here in a minute. But you can kind of see the type of environment that we're in. I mean, we're just in the ground, and it's certainly cooler in the ground than it is, up on the surface, but it's still pretty hot all day. But we're really entranced by what we're kind of learning, because as you dig through this layers of sediment, you begin to uncover different things. And a lot of the different things that we would uncover, so about maybe 10 to 1, we would get a lot of charcoal or completely burnt through wood. Now for that, every 10 times we would find that, you would find a bone or some type of remains, but they look nearly indistinguishable. Now, this soil is also kind of like shale. It's not, what you would think typically when you think maybe about a paleontologist really, painstakingly, like with some sort of pneumatic drilling through. Now, there are places where that exists on Ghost Ranch, but the majority of it is this kind of shaly sediment that built up from flood events. That's at least what they theorize. So not just one flood event, numerous floods events, and they were catastrophic. So within this sediment, there are layers upon layers of catastrophic remains. Oh, I should say, I'm sorry, that Dr. Morris is showing an Imkiwahata jacket, what he had previously found before we got there. And these were phytosaur bones. So the phytosaur, if you remember, was the big giant crocodile. So these bones were rather substantial in their size. I think the big one that is behind that they're not touching was a forearm of the phytosaur. And I think, if I'm not incorrect, what they're touching may be part of a hand or a vertebrae. And now this little diagram shows you in the bottom right the different positions of the quarry. So Hayden 4 is down, and you can actually see this corresponding to the stratification on the left side. You can see where H4 is at the near the bottom in that kind of gray shaly colored stuff. So that's where we were for the majority of our time. That's where that picture was. Hayden 2 was just a little bit above us. And I don't know exactly how many millions of years just in that kind of like short distance, but we're talking millions of years within just these different quarries, I believe. And then H3 was where we were standing in the landscape portrait. And you can see where H3 corresponds kind of underneath that 30. So, just walking down the hill, you're still finding kind of the same organisms or the same animals, but we're walking through millions of years of time, just walking down the hill. This is the type of things that we find, or the type of coloring that it is. So like I was saying, a lot of this burnt material, I don't know why it's black. I assume that it's from the leaching from the surrounding soils. So one thing I discovered through this Paleo Week was that, fossils that are this old, we're talking 200 million years old plus, they've been in the ground for that long. They're not actually completely bone anymore. They've been dissolved. The bone has been dissolved, and it's more like a cast and a mold system. For those of you who are sculptors and understand that, the stuff leaches out of the cast or the mold, and then other stuff leaches in and becomes a cast. So in a sense, we're looking at, not fully exchanged bone, but we're looking at a lot of sediment that's been deposited within the bone. And those molds create super precise, delicate details. They will mimic that. So you can get those details out of the fossils. This gives you an idea. These are national park coloring pages. But this gives you an idea of the type of stuff that we were finding. So I was finding kind of like this middle ground stuff where it's like the coelophysid type things. Animkiwa was finding these smaller Drepanosaur type animals. And we never really found any of these larger kind of horned animals, but they were in the record, just not in our quarry. This image gives you an idea of the kind of the proximity that we're working together. We're nearly shoulder to shoulder all day working. And so one thing that really appealed to me was that we started to create this kind of symbiosis and nonverbal communication where we're actually working together, kind of like an astronaut crew or like a tank crew, where we're working, but we're not really needing to tell each other what to do. We're kind of anticipating what needs to happen. So that's a really interesting thing that happens. But I've paired it with this other image of a painting by Leshek that is a rather recent rendition of what they think Ghost Ranch looked like more kind of accurately. So not so much swamp, but maybe a little bit more dry, but still areas that have water and a lot more fire. So not to be too didactic, of course, I know that's where this goes, but the world back then had 3 to 10 times more CO2 in the air. So that meant there were 3 to 10 times more plants, but there was also 3 to 10 times more fires probably as well. So you can see there's the phytosaur, and it's actually got the Drepanosaur in his mouth. And then the coelophysis is above those two in the middle. And they theorize that one also now has feathers. So in that very, beginning of the presentation, I showed that picture of Coelophysis, and it zeroed in on that dotted line area. Well, when I was out in the quarry, I actually uncovered this form. And, while you're uncovering things, you don't quite know if it's a piece of charcoal. Charcoal has a glisten like this as well. But then as I started to kind of take more away, I realized that, oh, these undulating forms are kind of like a pattern. There's a pattern here. That's not natural, or that's not something that I've been seeing. So I brought Randy over, and Randy was like, oh, wow, that's actually a sacrum of a Coelophysis, or a Coelophysid type animal. And I was like, wow, okay, what's a sacrum? And he mentioned that the sacrum is not something that we have in our physiology, and it's just like in reptiles or birds, where you have a series of vertebrae that are embedded within the hip. And so that's probably why this stayed intact, was that it was somehow kind of housed, because as I said, things that you find in here have been tumbled and rumbled and disarticulated. So you never really quite find anything that's, at least where I'm at in Hayden, we never really found anything intact. So when I uncovered this, Randy was like, okay, just take as much away that you can, that we're not going to harm the fossil. And then we'll add some adhesive, this liquid adhesive, to the whole thing to kind of bind it and somewhat keep it intact. So I did that. Then we end up taking the rest of it, all the surrounding area away from it, to create, in a sense, kind of a mushroom. And you even take away some of the bottom part. So once you do that, you get the jacket, which is plaster, and it's no different from when they started doing this. It's the same exact process. We just get plaster and we put it on, we let it dry. Then you take some sort of sharp instrument and go underneath the fossil, tip it upside down, and then you're left with that intact fossil. And then you jacket the top so that it can be taken away and prepared eventually. But, I was floored. I didn't think that, one, I would ever get a chance to dig dinosaurs. When this whole project started, I thought, okay, we're going to do Paleo Week, and we're going to go out there. They're going to show us where these things are, and we're never going to get a chance to even be close to them, right? So in my wildest of wild dreams, I never thought that I was going to be able to kind of discover something myself. And that's not to, hinge on any colonial kind of connotations, but this is just such a profound experience that so much goes through my mind when I'm thinking about what happened right here. And I thought to myself, okay, Randy, take over, go for it, professional hands at work. And Randy was like, no, you got to do it all yourself. So it was a real crash course. And it's open to the public, this Paleo Week. So if you've ever wanted to do this and have instruction, this is something, again, this is like an ad for them, but it was a really great opportunity, and I applaud them for letting us do it, and I'm just grateful. So this was kind of like some of the deliberation. Zach was giving me instruction. They had, he had showed Enumclaw how to do this earlier, but when, it's time to go and it's a new one, it was pretty nerve-wracking, because I didn't want to ruin anything. But ultimately, I was pretty happy with it. That exaltation is just from the feeling of, not destroying something. At the end of the day, after 5 o'clock, we would all kind of unwind and, go to our respective corners. And then at about 6 or 7, we would get back together in the classroom, and we would go over all the different things that we'd found from the day. There were roughly about 10 of us on these different quarries. And so it was really cool to be able to kind of come at the end of the day and see what everybody had found. And this was by far my largest fossil that I found. And I really just dug the whole, the coding, the numbering. So this was to help this understand, this was H4. That's where we found it. I think it was the 174th item in that H4 box, maybe for that season. And then that's the date. So that would have been, back in the summer of last year. So after, my Paleo Week, I learned from Randy that, yeah, of course, that other model was inaccurate. And he showed me this photograph, or this drawing, this rendition of what they presume to be more accurate. So you can see Fiji is kind of leading the race. Coelophysis is there, the carnivore behind it, and then Demonsuchus, I believe I'm saying that right, was found rather recently, and also they found that it was a small predator. So this became the gospel for me on the design. So in earnest, I began, I blew the image up to about the size that I had thought it needed to be. My model is not quite adult size. Adult size, what they've at least found is about 6 feet long. My model is about 5 feet long, so he's probably a spry teenager, and he kind of looks it. You'll see. But this gives you an idea of the kind of the scale that I'm working at. I sourced cedar from local retailers, but I also sourced it from Animkiwa's family and my own family. So again, having family is a big component of this. It's not as if I'm just, working alone. It's still a family kind of endeavor. So a lot of the wood that I got was sourced, through either coyote fencing or just larger pieces of cedar. And one thing that I'll mention is that when I was carving and I would get to the heartwood, which is this purpley kind of burgundy color, it would look more like this color down by the knife. It's that really elegant purple. It's almost like a royal kind of regal purple. And interestingly enough, that purple will fade within about 4 days. So, it's an ephemeral kind of thing that really attracted to me to that color. So I started with what I thought was maybe kind of the more harder components. And I thought, even though the arms are small, they've got a lot of feeling and emotion to them. So I started with them and was really happy with how they came out, and they're really just cute. Then I started on the feet. This gives you an idea of the different types of, forms and designs I had to work with. But it also gives you an idea, if you can see that up in the leg portion, the right leg, you'll see a bunch of holes in the leg. So with every piece of cedar that I carved into, I found remnants or actual bark beetles. And so I had to kind of understand how that whole process worked, and are they going to continue to eat the wood, or just all these questions that I had to kind of address before I really, jumped back into it and spent all this time thinking, well, maybe they're going to eat it. If I didn't know, I just had no clue. So I found out that if you take, certain layers of the bark off, well, that's what they eat, and they're not going to eat the interior per se. They just kind of burrow into it. And so I would find some of these, and it was a crazy experience. This is where the foot is starting to get whittled down. Now, the design is great when you're looking at it from the side, but I didn't really have anything to go on from this plane, right? From front to back. So I had to start looking at Sterling Nesbitt's research material. And in it, there was a plethora of fossil images that I could take and from those images deduce how this thing actually looked from the front and back form. So this is starting to, gain traction, both the legs. I wanted to create some kinetic energy. I didn't want it to just be, like an Egyptian statue. I wanted it to have some sort of, potential. And then there's the tail. The tail, it's like this animal is half tail. So, the tail is like a good 2.5 feet long. It's pretty substantial. And then the head and neck. So you can start to see that this is starting to form. Fiji had kind of like a beak. So something that could snap off leaves or potentially, bite something with some force to defend itself. From that, I just began kind of experimenting with what the eye should look like as well. I played with the sliver eye just because it really looked cool, right? That's a cool looking eye. But the truth is that Ephegia is not a nocturnal animal, and it's a prey animal. So it probably didn't have nocturnal cat eyes. So I went with the rounded eye, or the rounded pupil. And at the end of the day, after it's all stained and waxed and put on a base, this is what you end up with. And we shot this here at the O'Keefe Creative Studio right here where I'm at one day. And I'm really very happy with how this model kind of came out to be. So this, in a sense, will be the centerpiece of the exhibition. And I'll show you in a little bit where that falls, but I just want to show a little bit more of the model itself. So this here, you get the front view, and it's definitely got some Muppet characteristics. It's as I carved it, it really began to have a really quite inquisitiveness. It's almost like it's curious, and that fit right into it. As an artist, sometimes we just let things develop, and I think I kind of had a hand in that with this one. I just really let it develop and be what it wanted to be. But I was really shooting also for that heartwood color. It's such an elusive color, but with this image, you kind of see it a little bit more. Different light, it certainly changes, and you'll see in this next image. So I took this image in my backyard just a couple of weeks ago, and the grass is all dead, but this gives you a little bit of an idea of maybe it brings it to life a little bit more having it in nature, and you can kind of imagine that it just kind of popped out of the tree and surprised you, and you surprised it. But what's interesting was that I put a high sheen on the eyes, and within this image you can really see that sheen is just really lustering off of that left eye, and it was kind of emblematic of maybe how it would really look. So back to that crate idea, number 4. I was fortunate enough to be here at a time when there was some construction going on, and they were getting rid of some things. And one of these crates were one of the things they were getting rid of. This crate had housed one of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings, the paintings titled The Barns. And it's a rather large crate. So this crate will be able to fit a Fiji in it. And you'll see in the next image that it fits really well. They marry really well. And I had utilized spray paint stencil with Nimke was font that he created. So the title is on the crate as well. So this is a picture right outside of my house of a Fiji on top of the crate married. And of course, it's not the full thing, but it gives you an idea perhaps how it could be exhibited at another venue. It won't look like this in Axel, but with every new venue you go to or you put your exhibition in, it can change. So this is just another kind of version of that idea. This is the idea, I think it was like the third idea, the picture of the scientist or the artist with the model itself. Now I'm not working on it. It's more of a contemporary version of that, but it suffices. And I don't know exactly how this will fit into the exhibition, but again, it could be on down the road in another one. These are just spectacular. So Animkiwa also revised his initial ideas. And this is when he put together that earlier version that I showed you of the species pending title, the final version. He handed these in together with that. But this is kind of an evolved version of those puppets, and I just think they're exquisite. They just are beautiful. If you look at this image and then pair back to that one, it's just like they've married each other, and it's perfect. This is the other one that he created. So there have always been two, and I told Nimke, I was like, I think these are kind of like maybe portraits of us on some level, and they're interchangeable. So it's not as if he's one and I'm the other. We're probably both of them at the same time. So this is the image that we ultimately kind of fell on using this image. And I'll try to speed it up because I know I'm kind of coming to the end of my time. Sorry, I didn't realize I was behind. But this just gives you an idea of kind of the mock-up that I was playing with. One of the things that we could potentially do, playing with the fire, because these guys, they lived with fire. It was probably an everyday occurrence for them, and it wasn't something new or something that they didn't live with. This will be what the front of axle will ultimately look like with Nimke's puppets on the front. And then Nimke's marquee will be on the sides. Both sides of the truck will have this marquee of species pending. And then on the inside, this gives you a little bit of an idea of where the model will be. We will be flanking the model behind it and off to the sides. I don't have that digitally rendered in this, but it will flank around just like this image indicates. So this gives you more of a breadth. This was made by Matthew Chase Daniel, who is one of two of the counterparts of Axle Contemporary. So he sent this along yesterday so that I could share it with you today to give you a kind of a better understanding of how we're going to have to wheat paste this on the inside of the truck. This gives you an idea of the diorama. So we will eventually be going into schools and community spaces and sharing that initial idea. So what I began with, I'm ending with. So this gives you a little bit of a glimpse. So they'll be able to color it, design the background, and then take it home and play with it. Now, last but not least, this is a major jump because this is not really anything to do with species pending, but I have been given another opportunity by the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. They commissioned me to make a book, if you will, with the help of Riso Lana down in Albuquerque, a great resource, great crew of people down there. And so I devised this idea of making a graphic novel around the Cold War. So this is my attempt at making a Cold War spy thriller. I'm always trying to do new things. I never really try to do the same thing over again. So I've never done a graphic novel, and I've never wrote something about the Cold War, which is really something I dance around a lot in kind of my oeuvre. But this is going to be something that we will be giving away to everyone who can attend or everyone who can catch one. I think we have about 200 or 250 of them. We're going to be giving those away, one a piece to whoever can attend the opening on April 18th in the rail yard. But we're also giving a copy away to the farthest attendee to today's event, to today's lecture. So if you are tuning in from a faraway reaches, you'll be able to get one of these graphic novels and enjoy it. So this is just one page, and it gives you a little bit of an idea of the found objects, the types of things that I'm working with in this. There's also drawings, and so this is the last slide that I'll leave you with. This gives a little bit of an idea of the kind of chorusing that goes through the whole book. So at the bottom of certain pages, the characters will ask if you have the cigarettes, and this is one of the reasons that they're asking is because some of the cigarettes are little single shot guns, but they're also cameras. So these people are spies. So it's a fun little narrative. It's total entertainment. And I'll leave you with that. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll give it back to Molly.
All right, Jameson, thank you so much. In 1 hour, you were able to take us on this incredible journey, starting with you as a child wearing a t-shirt with a dinosaur on it, and to all these amazing things that you've been doing and the research you've done and the art you've created. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us and with our audience here. We really appreciate that.
Sorry it took so long. I didn't realize I was waffling too much.
I think you really took us in. Thank you so much for doing that. And I want to go ahead and let people know, as Jameson said, we want to send the furthest flung person who's joining us today a copy of this limited book that's being created as a part of this project. So in the Q&A box, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, maybe the city and state where you're joining from, because I can pull that information later and reach out to the person who is the furthest away. But in the meantime, while folks are doing that, let's go ahead, and we have one question I think we can squeeze in here, and it's going to come from Ryan. Ryan is asking, Jameson, it feels like species pending is geared towards children. How do you envision it engaging adults? And so, this project is for all ages, and wondered what you thought about that.
Well, I think the dioramas are really geared towards children, but, creating Axle I've made Axel into a diorama itself. And I think the diorama of Axel is more adult based in a sense that, yeah, it's still playful, but there's older people looking back at you as audience members. So, it's interesting that you say that it's geared towards children. It certainly is, but I think, adults can take something from it too.
Absolutely. And I agree. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the full installation in person. And for those of you who are here in the Santa Fe area, just to remind you that the official opening of Species Pending in collaboration with Axel Contemporary is going to be Friday, April 18th from 5 to 7 p.m. It's free to attend, and it's going to be at the Santa Fe Rail Yard in the shaded structure near the farmers market. So, and that will also be an opportunity for you to grab one of those books if you are so lucky. And Jameson, I'd like to wrap these up with a remark from the audience, and I want to share with you what Catherine had to say. She says, "This is such a wonderful story of a multifaceted journey," and she thanks you and says that she is loving being able to hear about it. So I like to wrap up with a comment like that, and to ask if there's anything else you want to share before we close out.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think one thing that I didn't really get to during this presentation that's really kind of central to it is just the ability to kind of think about, um, you know, other cultural viewpoints about fossils and thinking about, how maybe, and I'm going to go out on a branch here and say that maybe even ancient people finding fossils are some of the precursors for cultural myth or cultural story. So really this story or this narrative is really nothing new in the grand scheme of like trying to make sense of the world. And so, I'm trying to fit into a more ancient kind of storytelling. And that was just maybe like the last kind of point that I really wanted to make about this.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. And there's just so much to think about. I certainly didn't know about all of the incredible fossils that are just right outside our door. And it's been great to go on that journey with you today and to be able to see your work in person in just a few short weeks. So we are at 10 o'clock, and I just want to thank everyone again for joining. Susan says, wonderful presentation. How long will Species Pending be showing and available to the public? When we send our follow-up email, I can send some more information about how long the exhibition will be on view and some other logistics like that. But otherwise, just lots of thank yous, and we'll be excited to see who the furthest attendee is. But otherwise, Jameson, thank you again for being here. Looking forward to the exhibition, and thanks again to everyone who joined, and we hope to see you at the next Mornings with O'Keefe program, which will be in May.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Have a great day.